So, welcome to small group tonight. I'm glad you're there or here, depending on how you're talking about it. Here for me right now is I'm sitting in an empty Freedom House, just reflecting a bit about this weekend. What happened this weekend on our 8th anniversary, the great things and stories we heard, and what God's done over the last 8 years, and our dialogue we had yesterday morning, which we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes, but also last night for the Volley Awards. And again, just want to say to everyone there, you're all worthy of a volley. If we could buy 100 volleyballs, everyone in the church does so much. So thank you for all you do, and make Freedom House a great place to hang out in and also serve in. So that's great. And volunteer, aka Volley. Today we're going to talk about what we talked about on Sunday, as we always do, and it was the 8th anniversary weekend. Great time, and we called the message "And God Said." And God said, and that becomes, for some people, that becomes quite a dilemma when you say things like God said. Because I think we've all been, this is how I started on Sunday, yesterday morning, I think we've all been a place where people say, and God told me, and you go, wow, that just seems really weird because I don't think he did. Or then there's times that people say, and you go, wow, God really did. And then there's a spectrum in between. So what do you do with that? Do you give up on the God saying stuff because the whack meter goes off? Or do are you stuck in the middle? Or are you stuck in the fact that, one of the verses I used was from John where Jesus said, my sheep know my voice. And I talked about how that affected me as a teenager coming up because I wasn't taught or told about the voice of God per se. So what do you do with that? Let me just give you the quote I started with from a Facebook account. It said, the idea of having conversation with God wasn't a part of my religious upbringing. Prayer was talking at God in appropriate, reverent language and about a limited set of topics. God talked at me through the Bible and the pastor, and then once in a while we said grace. So later on when I'm done this, I want you to go back to that quote, and I want you to think about, like, how were you brought up discussing the idea of talking to God? Or maybe you weren't brought up with that idea, maybe the opposite. So talk about that a little bit. But then we went into Joshua chapter 1, and you can grab that in your Bibles right now if you want, Joshua chapter 1. And I will take time this week to read through that, so you just grab it, and I'm reading from NIV. After the death of Moses, Joshua 1, starting at verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and very courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. And through the morning yesterday, I took 4 points out of that, out of those few verses, those 8 verses, talking about, first of all, I talked about that you have to believe that God still speaks. You have to believe. So when it says God said to Joshua, what it means there is, right, that's the right answer. God said to Joshua, and then he gave him specific instructions. So do we still believe that God speaks to us that way? Do we still believe that God speaks to us at all? And how does that happen? And how do we get his word? And you can talk about the 3 ways that his word comes to us if you'd like there, because we've reiterated that every time. So we talked about that. And if God does still speak, which we probably think he does, then it would probably be important to us to find out how he does, how he speaks to us, and what that looks like. Because if he's got an opinion on stuff, we probably want it. That's good. So the second point was be strong and courageous. So first, believe that God speaks. Secondly, be strong and courageous. After God speaks, you will need strength and courage. You'll need strength and courage because your weakness and your fear will rise up. That's what happens to all of us. It does. God says something, or we know we have a new task to do, and fear and weakness, we see our weaknesses. I mean, when Moses was called, it's like, oh, I can't speak. When Jeremiah is called, I'm too young, I can't speak. I mean, that's the human response immediately when God speaks. And so we need to go, okay, there is going to be fear. What do we do with that? There are going to be, our weaknesses are going to come up. What do we do with that? And so 3 times God says to Joshua, be strong and courageous. The third point on Sunday was, be careful to obey. And I said to you, this is where 8 years ago when we're setting up for Freedom House, this is where we got the phrase that we use all the time at Freedom House, is hear God and obey. So listen, God's speaking, and then obey. It's not enough just to hear him, and it's not enough just to do stuff because you want to hear God and obey. So the stuff you're doing is from God, and you're not just hearing him. So you want to do both of those. So hear God and obey. And under this third point, I told a ton of a bunch of Freedom House stories just through the years. I talked about how Charles and I moved here back in '98. I talked about God talking about us that it's time and how we found the old building up on Market Street. We talked about that a bit. We talked about the story about buying the big blue house. We talked about the tension of the affordable housing project that we went through 3, 4, 5 years ago, and that whole mix of it. But you guys are sitting there. You've got stories as well, whether you just came to Freedom House or whether you've been here for years as well. So maybe take some time there to talk about what did hear God and obey mean for you regarding Freedom House. What did it mean for you to, well, why am I going to join this new church plant? Why am I going to be a part of that? Or, talk about that. What did it mean for you to hear God and obey about Freedom House, but maybe also some specific things about living for God? And then I quoted from Bill Maher from the Real Time, and I said, this is probably my favorite atheist quote right now. So I don't know, maybe you could share your favorite atheist quote, but here's what Bill Maher said. He said, if you ignore every single thing Jesus commanded you to do, you're not a Christian. You're just auditing. You're not Christ's followers. You're just his fans. You should talk about that for a minute. That's a great quote. If you ignore every single thing Jesus commanded you to do, you're not a Christian. You're just auditing. You're not Christ's followers. You're just a fan. That's a great one. And then I quickly threw out from Luke 6 the fact that, why do you say, Jesus said this, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? And then he went on to tell the parable, the story of the wise and foolish builders, of those that heard the word and responded to it, and those that didn't. So important points there under the hear God and obey thing, or be careful to obey point. And then I quoted from a young lady from our church, Trina Hill. Yay, if you're in Trina's house right now, go, yay, give her a big hug or something. And here's what Trina said, which I thought was a great point under this one for us. She said this on one of her Facebook passages a little while ago. She said, if you've been struggling to give something up or to begin something, start by examining your motives, confess and repent, and begin to make one right choice at a time. If you fail, you've only failed at one choice, then the next choice come. When the next choice comes, choose again. Really, really good. So you can chat about that. And then out of that, just one more thing out of the hear God and obey. And then we said that obedience is success. Really important point, because we measure success so differently today in North America, in Brantford. We measure by how big this is, or how small this is, or how smart we are. And for God, specifically in these verses, the success came from obedience. Obedience is success. So hear God and obey. Obedience is success. The last point was, be content in your prosperity and success. Be content. Okay? And again, at the end of verse 8 there, it says, if you are obedient, if you're careful to obey all these things, you will be prosperous and successful. So again, we need to discuss, like, what does it mean? How do you define prosperity? How do you define success? And we talked about that a little bit, and you can take some time and do that if you want. And what happens? We threw out the idea, like, what happens when you're obeying God and it doesn't look like the success you wanted? Going back to the stories I told, I mean, from the early 90s to, where we are now, the 20 years of getting where God showed us some things years ago, it doesn't happen overnight. We don't really serve like a microwave God. Just put it in a few seconds, it's all out. There's no drive-throughs in the kingdom. So what do you do with that when it doesn't seem like you're getting the intended end in the intended time that you have? And maybe you're you're tempted a little bit to say, I'm not prosperous and successful the way I want to be. And so then the last quote we left you with was, don't fake it till you make it, but faith it. Hear what God says and walk in faith. Faith it till you make it. So there's lots of stuff to talk about in there. I gave you some questions on the way through. So talk through those things. There's lots of points there to talk through. So I just encourage you to pull out some of these questions out of the notes that I gave the leaders. Pull some of those questions out. Have a good small group. And thanks for 8 great years at Freedom House.